I am no bird, and no net ensnares me.
Your wife and you had bought this house in London.
And that fits in with what we said earlier about having this diverse team that all comes together to create something fantastic.
And that really resonates with me because I don't think we have enough women in the rooms where decisions are being made.
And we don't want to rub out everybody's differences to try and make us all fit a mould.
People will never forget how you made them feel.
We create a better story. We leave better legacies. Welcome to the latest installment of Went and Friends. We do hope you enjoy listening. Welcome to our very first episode of Went and Friends. Today we are honoured and privileged to welcome three leaders in laryngology and head and neck surgery. Professor Janet Wilson, Professor Vin Paleri, and Mr. Guri Sandhu, all of whom are here to discuss their perception of diversity in the medical space, what the challenges are, how far we've come, and the changes we need to make moving forward. They do this by pulling from their own experiences, and I hope you enjoy this episode. But first, a little introduction. Professor Janet Wilson is Professor of Otolaryngology, Head and Neck Surgery at Newcastle University, and she's also past President of the British Laryngological Association. She has held the substantive chair in Otolaryngology, Head and Neck Surgery at Newcastle University since 1995. She was only the second female to be appointed to a UK chair in the surgical discipline. She has won a lot of awards and honours for her work. Despite being retired from clinical practice, she continues to work closely with the Royal College of Surgeons of Edinburgh. Professor Vin Paleri is consultant head and neck surgeon at the Royal Marsden Hospital. He is Professor of Robotics and Endoscopic head and neck surgery at the Institute of Cancer Research here in London. He pioneered robotic surgery in the United Kingdom and has the largest experience in transoral robotic surgery in the UK. He is a prolific researcher in head and neck cancer, and he is extensively published. He's the current president of the British Association of Head and Neck Oncologists. And last, but by no means least, is Mr. Guri Sandhu, who is consultant laryngology head and neck surgeon at Imperial College and the Royal National Throat, Nose and Ear Hospitals, as well as the Royal Brompton Hospital. He set up the National Centre for Airway Reconstruction in London, which comprises a multidisciplinary team of specialists and has treated the largest number of adult patients with laryngotracheal stenosis in Europe. He is currently president of the British Laryngological Association. Welcome to you all. So I'm going to get right onto things here. And you're all three brilliantly accomplished people. We are lucky to have a woman who is a beacon of hope for a lot of other women in the specialty, having reached the echelons of head and neck surgery and otolaryngology, which is our specialty. And we've got two men who are of Asian extraction, who are also at the pinnacle of their careers, and they just keep going. The reason I mentioned these particular individual characteristics is because we are now experiencing a time where there's more discussions about diversity and inclusivity. And of course, this podcast is being hosted by women in ENT surgery. And some of our discussions today are going to touch on how our individual traits have enabled us progress or have been challenging during our careers, but also how they may have enabled us. The first question I was going to ask goes to Professor Wilson. Can you give me two particular examples of how being a woman has influenced your career? And what is the one advice that you have for women in general in the field of surgery?
Mm-hmm. I think it's quite difficult to say. Obviously, each of us goes through life with the traits that we have, and so it's probably not very productive to speculate how you might have lived your career as another gender or from another country or whatever. I guess one thing, possibly, it's quite hard to think back because it's such a long time since I started my career, but I guess when I was selecting ENT, kind of struck me at the time that it's the sort of career that if you did want to combine with family, it was going to be slightly more manageable than certain other specialties where a lot of the work happened during the night. I don't think, to be honest, looking back to when I was making my decision, I was a long way off even, finding my partner, far less having any children. I don't think it influenced me in my choice of career, but it certainly didn't dissuade me from thinking it wasn't perhaps a bad choice. And I think it's sensible, whatever gender you are, to think about the structure of your working life in your chosen career. And remember, of course, that once you've finished training, you have a lot more control over your timetable. It's hardest as a trainee when you're at the beck and call of other people's timetables.
Yes. Now, there is a lot of talk about diversity and inclusivity, and I want to ask you, Vin Paleri, what does it mean to you? What does diversity and inclusivity in surgery mean to you?
Diversity is a terminology in my head. And when you look at surgery as a career, you find the entire spectrum within surgical practice these days. Which is why we have to really consider diversity at the front and center of surgical practice, give it its due importance, because it influences not just the people practicing surgery, but it also influences the people who are on the receiving end of medical and surgical care. So to me, it's front, center, and core of what we do as surgeons within our specialties.
And Guri Sandhu, what does it mean to you?
Me personally, it means having the same opportunity to succeed regardless of your gender, your color, or sexual orientation. And I personally believe it should be merit-based, and there should be no restriction on who you are, where you're from, or how you identify yourself, but purely on merit. So I don't know if that fits with other people's views, but...
So we talk about merit, and I like the fact that you brought that on, but is it possible as well that merit isn't a straight line, and that merit can also be skewed towards privilege? Because you achieve merit based on the opportunities you get, and the opportunities you get perhaps are influenced by your position in society, or what your position is perceived to be in society.
So, if I may continue then, being the child of immigrants, being a first generation immigrant, in fact, I felt things were stacked against me, and it's always the people who come up first who open the door to others. And if you're saying that in ENT it is possible that things are skewed against race, I'm not going to comment on gender at the moment, but are skewed against race. I've been inside those rooms, I've been inside those committees, and you have to trust me, they're not anymore. So yes, interpretation in general, yes, it's open to perspective, but I think in ENT now, certainly in terms of race, and I won't make that judgment in terms of gender, I hope it's not, and I don't believe it is, but I don't think there is that kind of discrimination.
So I'm going to come to Vin Paleri just to give a bit of summary about your experience and whether or not you agree with Guri Sandhu, or whether you experience something differently to what he has in terms of, does race still play a part in progress in our space in ENT?
So personally, I must say I've been incredibly lucky in the kind of mentors I've had within the space that I have trained in. And I don't simply say this because Janet's here, but it's simply because people I've trained under have mentored me, nurtured me, and helped me progress. But having said that, I have seen significant disadvantages experienced by other people of different color and races within the work environment. And I can't deny that. So when we were applying for progression, for entry into registrar grades, and I was lucky that The second place I applied, the second deanery I applied into, I was selected. But I have seen other very meritorious candidates, people who are good clinicians, people who are considerate, compassionate clinicians, trained in good places, struggle for quite a while. I could never understand why they had that struggle, but first-hand knowledge and first-hand stories relate to me indicate that this may have played a participating factor.
Vin, can I just say something? Are you talking about people here who've come to do their training later on in life rather than people who've grown up here as people of colour?
Correct.
Okay.
That's a certain differentiation to make.
Yeah.
And I first came to the UK, and I came in as a first-generation immigrant. This was 98, 99. Clearly, my friends at that time, I had a smaller circle of friends because you're just immigrant, you just landed, were mainly people from my background and heritage, and those are the people who clearly had trouble. But I must say, you're right, Guri, in pointing that difference out. People who were brought up within this environment, who trained here, progressed and did extremely well. I didn't see that amount of discrimination against people who trained and went to med school here.
I think that the new Royal College of Surgeons of England's report on diversity in the leadership and in the surgical body as a whole gives really good evidence for the fact that race is still a big part of our surgical community and presents still significant challenges. And soon we will be conducting our own research within our ENT committee, and hopefully that will shed some more light so we actually have more objective data. Prof. Wilson, with your experience having mentored so many people, what do you think is the most common reason why people don't necessarily thrive in our specialty?
I think, it's hard to generalize, but if you're talking along the axes that we've been discussing, I think some of the people I've mentored who've come from other cultures to work here, you referred to merit not being a sort of straight line, and I absolutely take that point. People have advantages because they know a system, because it's familiar, and so not because they're more intelligent or have better deductive reasoning or otherwise. You can't deny that or abolish it, I don't think, realistically. But sometimes it's difficult to persuade people to stop being, for example, too deferential. That it's quite difficult sometimes to say to people, your boss is going to think more of you if you're just a little bit more robust in your dealings. Would you stop bowing and scraping to the boss? You may think that's being very courteous, but they might find it either irritating, frankly, or they might lack then confidence in you, that they cannot feel they leave you on your own to make a decision because you're so deferential to their opinion. And that's a really hard transition to encourage people to make.
Yes, absolutely. And that's where that cultural intelligence comes into place, isn't it? And who tells that trainee? Who says that to that person? How do we communicate effectively with people who are coming into an environment that's foreign to them? How do we make them feel more comfortable? And do you feel therefore there's a lot more training and consideration that has to go into mentorship and actually perhaps being a clinical supervisor or an educational supervisor in the current training pathway? And I asked that question to Guri, Sandhu.
I am actually an educational supervisor and a clinical supervisor. It's a difficult one because I've always said you've got to know the rules of the game and you've got to be able to play the game well. Mm-hmm. And if the rules require that, your manner and your practice has to come into line with what's being practiced in the department you're working in, then that's how it has to be done. But if you're a young person coming here, it's easy to mold yourself to the society that you're now living in. But when you come in more senior, it is very difficult. And that's why I asked Vin about what age group or what point in people's careers he was talking about. It is difficult. But Vin, clearly you've done it. Now, I know you're a highly intelligent, capable guy, and you probably would have risen to the top wherever, but you're probably the one to answer this one. How did you adapt? How did you integrate? How did you make yourself be a person of value?
Yes, so that was hard. The first 1-2 years were hard because when I think back and if I went back to where I was and if I could give myself some advice for when travel back into the past, what was missing was the lack of business style leadership skills. I had zero knowledge of organizational management within NHS. So navigating through the NHS was so difficult. The first inkling into what exactly was needed of me to progress within registrar trainee jobs, because my first few jobs were FTTA jobs in those days, if you recall, fixed term training appointment. To transition, I had to navigate through the posts and appreciate structures and get mentorship. This is where Janet, and I'm very happy to name names, Janet Wilson, Richard White, Andrew Robson. This is where these people came in. They just helped me navigate the system. This is exactly what I do these days, Guri. When I find a foreign candidate who comes in and who doesn't know the system, I sit with them, I mentor them. So what is required is a good knowledge of, and as Janet rightly said, assertiveness, organizational management, and those leadership skills, which we lack coming from the subcontinent. It may be, the gaps may be different from other countries.
That's actually, that is you being told the rules of the game. And that's you being told how to integrate into the system. But it's not so much about integration. And I think that in general, organizations are moving away from that term integration because it's more about people making space for you. You can't integrate where there is no space. So there has to be, first of all, an accepting culture. And how do you think we're doing from that perspective? And I'll ask Prof. Wilson to pick up from that, and then I'll come back to you, Guri.
I think ENT has long been regarded, as I say, I've been in medicine a long time, retired from my clinical jobs last November after 40 years plus in the NHS. And I think that ENT has, throughout all that time, been regarded as a relatively friendly specialty. It's not been quite as self-important as some other specialties. Now, that's a massive generalisation, but I found it one of the attractive things. It was one of the attractive things about ENT surgeons who were our tutors when I joined the specialty. And I still hear, if I'm discussing with people, why did you choose ENT as a career? It's often the people that attract people into the specialty. And so it is like a big network of people who are willing to mentor. And one of the problems we have is I think that people don't seek mentorship. They maybe don't even think about it. It doesn't have to be a formal relationship, but just to ask someone else for advice rather than floundering around. And I think I've very, very rarely met anyone who wouldn't be more than happy to give advice on an academic topic, clinical career topic. It's just not everyone perhaps has very enlightening answers, but I think everyone's really willing to help. So I think a sense of self-worth, I'm worthy of this space is possibly a good starting point for everybody. As regards women, there could be much better and more organised, I think, opportunities for less than full-time training. And I know that there are men who also work less than full-time or want to work less than full-time. But for too long, I think, after women were a substantial group in the workforce, young women were having to make up their own career plans, often paired with another woman, and I think the length of training was cruelly long for some of these people. They were doing more than the percentage on their timetable and they weren't getting proper credit. And this comes back to saying, it shouldn't be time-based. It's a bit like our present COVID circumstances, that we're not going to be ruled by the dates. But, yes, we are actually ruled by the dates when it comes down with it. And I think that could be moving more successfully. But we've got so much educational investment that we should be able to assess competence and confidence without having to refer back constantly to a number of months in the job.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Mrs. Sandhu, we're talking about mentorship in the surgical space. The question I want to ask is, how do you manage the generational gap between yourself and the current trainees? and I think everyone will agree with that, a different attitude to quality of life, to what the job should entail, to what people's rights and entitlements are. And I feel it's towards the positive, that it's something to admire. But I also know that I sometimes struggle with it. And I have to remind myself that this generation of people coming up behind us have a lot to offer for us to learn and a lot for us to learn from. So tell me how you're managing.
Okay, well, I'll tell you a little bit about advice I was given when I was coming up. I didn't come from privilege. Both my parents, they never went to school. They were literate in their own language, never mind English. I arrived in what you would call a ghetto in London. I went to some failing schools where the idea you might get to medical school would be, it was laughed at. So early on, I did actually talk to an Asian doctor who said to me, if you get into medical school, make sure you're at least 25% better than the local candidate in your achievements, your skills, and how you work and how hard you work. He said, then you will do well. And again, I had some advice when I was an SHO in general surgery from an Indian doctor who was probably on a fixed term contract. He was our registrar on this general surgery firm. And I said, how do I succeed? And he said, when you leave the job, the first thought your boss must have, how am I going to cope without him? And that's been my attitude. And you say this generational gap. We all talk about our time as junior doctors and the 126-hour weeks and all this kind of thing. And certainly I agree that it was unsafe practice and you couldn't make decent judgments when you're tired. But I think the European Working Time Directive has been one of the nails in what I hope isn't the coffin of the NHS, but it certainly knocked the NHS back. When the rest of Europe ignores the Working Time Directive, the problem with the British attitude is that you give them a rule, they follow it to the letter. So when your juniors tell you at 5 o'clock they have to leave, and the patient is still on the operating table, and then you're not allowed to say anything. I'm a trainer. I know that times have changed, and I've got to move forward with the times. Mm-hmm. But it does make you reflect a little bit, thinking, well, hang on, this is a vocation. Surely give another half hour, that kind of thing, without putting in a little report saying you were held back. But the other balancing thing I have, my daughter is a junior doctor. Mm. She has been doing SHO medicine and medical on-calls. And she'll come in and say, look, I was kept back an hour. What do you think I should do? I said, half an hour to 45 minutes, I think is reasonable. If they're consistently keeping you back over an hour, I think you should put a little report in. And my attitude is if it's good enough for my daughter, it's good enough for my trainees.
Yeah.
That's how I manage the age gap, if you like. Yeah. It's difficult.
It is.
It's difficult.
Yeah.
They have a different approach, and I don't always understand it. I always feel perhaps they should give a little bit more. And some of them do. Some of them shine. Some of them you have to actually kick out the operating room or the clinic and say, look, go home, or I'll get in trouble. Yeah. But, people are different and times have changed. And I do struggle to adapt, I must admit.
And Vin Paleri, how are you getting on? You've got 2 sons.
I've got 2 boys, so they keep me grounded and apprise me of developments in the world when it comes to diversity, and it's amazing. Young people are so much more attuned to this than I am, and I see the difference very clearly. So my older son, Vignesh, is a psychologist, and I could sit and chat with him about equality, diversity and stuff for ages, and he actually leads he's an anti-racism champion within his trust, and he leads a forum. So we could sit down and chat for ages, and he'd tell me interesting stuff. And likewise, my younger son, he will he comes from a different angle. He's 15, and his approach to diversity is interesting in that any comers, anything goes, nothing is off the menu. So they are my litmus test in terms of whether I'm an old bigoted 50-year-old man or not. Sometimes, but coming to the issue of junior doctors, I think Guri is spot on. Some people will work to rule, others crack on, and I think one advice to junior doctors who are listening and who do need to sign off at the right time, which I must say very small proportion do, is that when you're doing a major case and you held the retractor for them to complete the neck dissection, which is why the neck dissection took such a long time, then I think there is a moral obligation for them to stay back and help finish the case off. As an older person, it rankles. It is something that doesn't sit well with me, but I understand times have moved on. I have to cope with it, which I do. I mean, in the last few years, I haven't had anyone do that, but I certainly have had people come at 5 o'clock, waving the keys and saying, I'm off because my time's up, which is doesn't sit well.
Yeah. Yeah. So do you feel that this clock watching and the limitations of hours has affected the quality of surgical training? That question is for Professor Wilson.
Well, I think training's a two-way street, isn't it? I mean, you're only going to get the training that you as a trainee are going to be capable of. Now, that may be episode defined or it may be quality defined. I've not had many people kind of rushing off, but I have had people saying, oh, well, I was on call last night, or maybe 3 weeks ago, last Wednesday, I was up late, and so I don't think I'm quite up to doing whatever it is. And, you know, for me, I think you have to have a good sense of humour to survive medicine. And if they're not there, then you can have a good bitch about them with the anaesthetist, and that's very therapeutic. So, you know, every cloud is a silver lining. And I am sorry for these younger people who have grown up in a very self-aware, very formalised medical system, because some of the things which I look back on in my junior doctor years, I mean, we had a blast. They were outrageous. I mean, you just wouldn't say to your houseman as an SHO, oh, you've got lipoma, we're on night duty, we don't have much to do, I'll just take it off now here in theatre. I mean, you know, that kind of thing, you just wouldn't happen. You wouldn't see a junior doctor getting intravenous Maxilon before the ward round from the staff nurse at the nurse's station because they'd had a heavy night the night before. So it's difficult to really, and I just think it's like what's been said. You know, it's not better or worse. It's just very different, and I don't think we need to be 100% guilty about not exactly empathising or totally identifying. You know, we're just a bit different, and I don't think it. I think it would be sycophantic to say, you know, I'm absolutely down with it, and it usually just ends up looking a bit stupid if you try to over-identify with people who have had such different experience.
Absolutely. And this actually feeds into the next discussion point, which is about the realistic expectations of individuals in training today, whether or not it's men, women, less than full-time trainees, etc. And I'm going to take the attitude to service delivery now. Personally, I feel that you don't necessarily have to work a full 5-day week to be effective. And some people think not. They think that you have to be at work, you know, from 8 till midnight and burning the midnight oil. But also I have an appreciation for the amount of work that goes into, for example, running a service and driving your success. What is your perception of how currently trainees think about what success is about? I'll ask that question to Guri Sandhu.
You want me to get in the head of our trainees?
Yes, absolutely.
I mean, I can't get into the head of our trainees, but I can look, the trainees that stand out are the ones who give you that little bit extra. They have an understanding. They have people skills. You know, they get on with their colleagues. They get on with patients. They know how to communication, knowledge, and just being there and just offering help every now and then. That's the difference. If you're asking about, you started off asking about, you don't necessarily need to be doing a full week to be trained or to be an effective doctor, I think is what you were saying. Well, that's fair enough. If that's your timetable program of activity, then that's factored in. But if you're meant to be there full time and you keep coming up with, oh, I've got to do this, I've got to go and have this training, or I've got to go and have this done, I've got to have this review, that review, then that's different. That's slacking off. But if your timetable to be there for a fixed period of time and you're fulfilling your commitments, then you're delivering what you're meant to be delivering. Now, if the question is, do you think that level of exposure will give you the equivalent training? Well, then that comes down, one, to the person, because we all learn at different rates and we have a different understanding of what a procedure is. And it's interesting that from training now appears to be going towards an apprenticeship-based system. That's what they're suggesting now, aren't they? Which is what it used to be, rather than, ticking off numbers of this, numbers of that, because they now understand that someone could do 2 of a given procedure and completely understand the ins and outs of it. And someone else needs to do it 20 times before they get some insight into that operation. So we are all different. Yeah. And if we are moving towards an apprenticeship type system, then I, as a trainer, can say this guy can do a mastoid, or this girl can do a mastoid. This person is safe to be on call. You can base that. You can make individual judgments. But currently, what we seem to be doing is ticking off things they've achieved. Yeah. And some of these things are quite light, and I don't know what the point is really. I spoke to a patient and I had good feedback. Can you sign me off? That's day and day, and we will make a judgment call on that. And the other thing I think trainees get wrong is, and it's not really related to the question, is they're in a hospital for 6 months or a year. We've been there for decades sometimes. I've been where I am for over 20 years. I know the cleaners. I know all the nurses. I know the ODAs. And these people pick up and they talk to you during their spare times. So some trainees think they have to just be nice to you and then they'll give a good impression. Yet the cleaning lady in the corridor in theatres will come to say, Mr. Sandhu, that person, she's not very nice. And, that sinks a person. And they don't appreciate it. They just have this little window and think, that they'll shine and with you and not have to bother with anyone else. And that's a good reflection of a person as well, actually. Are they who they are all the time, or are they who they are or seem to be just to you?
So very, very interesting point there, because you're talking about how other people perceive this individual and having access to you to report it. And as a woman, I can tell you that women fare worse than men in the general pool of public opinion, and so the question now is whether or not you feel that trainers and other people who are in senior management are aware of the fact that in the court of public opinion within the members of staff in a hospital, for example, the minority is more likely to get that snarky comment. The woman is more likely to get the negative feedback. The recent RES report does say that 10% as compared to 4% of Black and minority groups will have experienced harassment or aggression, etc., from a member of staff or a colleague compared to their white counterparts. So when you put all that together, do you therefore think that maybe it's time we speak out about how the organization perhaps needs to reflect more the trainee diversity and maybe not necessarily lay too much stock in what the general public are saying about your trainees, for example?
Okay. I think this may be regional as well, Mimi, because in London, more than half the staff are of some ethnic origin.
Yep.
And so certainly in London, it's quite diverse. Have I had an impression that women have been judged worse than men as trainees to date? I've not had that impression. Some of the brightest and doctors with the highest prospects have been female trainees, as far as my judgment called, trainees under me recently. And I will support them, and they will do well purely on merit, not because they're female, not because they're brown or black or whatever. It just doesn't, that doesn't sit with me at all.
And Prof. Wilson, what is your experience of this?
I don't think we should underestimate the importance of senior nurses in delivering training as well as delivering feedback. Mm-hmm. And if a theatre sister comes up and says, so-and-so isn't really very popular with the scrub team, you think, well, I know the scrub team, they're pretty accommodating because, they've seen it all. They know people have stressy moments and so on. And if they're taking against somebody, then that says quite a lot about that person's personality. And it's valuable feedback, because if they're lacking that situational awareness, they'll become even more of a danger to themselves and others, apart from the fact that they'll also lose out on training. Mm-hmm. So yes, I do see that. But coming to the point generally about how women are perceived, I do think in society at large, it does seem to me, and I haven't done any systematic research, that if a woman in power is having a rough ride from, let's say, her ministry or her civil servant colleagues or her parliamentary colleagues, she's very much more likely to be headmistressy, to be strident, to be bossy, to be bullying, to be undermining. And it seems to me that those adjectives coalesce more around women in authority. And it does seem to be, maybe it's just a skill that we haven't quite finessed properly yet, or maybe it is just that others still haven't quite got comfortable with women in authoritative positions. I just honestly don't know.
I'll come to Vin, actually. So I wanted to hear your impression on what you think about how individuals are perceived by members of the staff within a hospital setting, for example, and how that can influence how their seniors think about them, for example.
So I worked in 2 hospitals for the majority of my consultant career, and 4 years in the current one and 13 years in the previous one. And both work settings have been truly multicultural. They have had people of different genders, sexual orientation, races, disabilities. And maybe I've been lucky, but I've worked in incredibly tolerant, supportive atmospheres in both places. Interestingly, when you talk about the issue of women trainees perhaps being targeted more unfairly than others, if anything, my experience has been the reverse. We've had problem trainees who have been men, who've been very clearly highlighted by the supporting staff, by the nursing colleagues, rather than the other way around. Women colleagues are greatly appreciated. They're more caring. They're more, I would say it to any male colleague, they've certainly come across as more caring, more compassionate, and that is appreciated by the nurse on the ward, by the theatre nurses. So I understand the report, and some of the rest reports says very clearly that minority people are more subject to harassment and bullying. But that minority, I suspect, maybe doesn't apply in the trainee cadre, is my impression on this. Because they seem to be very well supported and mentored by the consulting group once they get to that stage. And, we shouldn't make light of the multi-system feedback we get, which is informal like this. And again, that has never fallen wrong in my experience. It's usually points to an issue, which I think needs to be addressed face to face. If it comes along, just sit with my trainee and address that.
Yes. That's very good to hear, that you will personally sit with someone and feed back to them when there's something negative. And I think sometimes there might be difficulties with some trainers not necessarily want to be confrontational or to have the difficult discussion, because the difficult discussion is what allows you to inform that individual so that the necessary changes can be made.
Can I just add a quick thing before you move on, Mimi?
Yes.
It's not just hospitals and doctors and nurses.
Of course.
It's the patients.
Yes.
A number of times my daughter will come home and she said, next time a patient calls me nurse, I'm going to scream. they don't help the situation. And it's society in general. And, the medical profession may well have moved on beyond the beliefs and expectations of society. So that's a difficult one as well.
Yes, that's good. Now we're going to talk about life outside of surgery and life after a surgical career. And Professor Wilson, you're retired now from clinical work, but you're still very busy, very active. And so I wanted to find out from you, what advice do you have to others who are training to allow them be able to retire like someone like you and be able to let go of clinical work quite happily, quite confidently? What advice have you got for trainees and consultants?
I think one of the great things about modern society is that there's a great deal of individual freedom, and I think it's marvellous how many different approaches there are to this watershed that work well for different individuals. So I've seen some colleagues who choose to take what you might call early retirement or early reduction in contract and maybe carry on with that more restricted number of sessions or repertoire of activities within the sessions, perhaps for a long time, for some people perhaps indefinitely. And if you meet someone who feels that they're not quite sure what their life might be without it, if they feel their identity, because of the commitment they've made to medicine perhaps over their lives, their identity is inextricably linked into their professional work, then why not? If they find a role that's age appropriate, if you like, then that's not a bad thing. And I think people shouldn't be castigated. It's like, people sometimes say to people, possibly myself, can't you just sit down and do nothing? Well, I'm not very good at sitting down and do nothing, but I don't really feel now I want to be guilty about that. I'm sitting down occasionally and not doing very much, perhaps. But so I think that it's nice, on the other hand, to have some fellow people to chew the fat with. I had a meeting with a very senior retired physician. She took early retirement. She was very high up in the College of Physicians in Edinburgh, as well as her care of the elderly work. And we agreed that it was quite amazing how, within a short space of time of stepping out of the hospital that had consumed us, body and soul, for all these decades, we didn't really give it very much of a backward glance. It's just not an area. Yes, you could recall it if you went through the door mentally. You could be in that scenario. But we just kind of moved on. And that's just the way it was.
Yeah. If you were saying to someone who has just started, for example, would you say, well, you know what, it's just a job at the end of the day, and quality of life outside is more important, for example?
Well, I think it's a truism to say we're fortunate in our job. Everyone goes to work in order to make money. And we wouldn't be doing exactly the jobs we're doing or have done if we weren't being paid for them. We might be doing some bits of them, but we wouldn't be doing all of them in the way that we do them. So we're lucky in medicine we have a fulfilling aspect. I think it's much more important, though, to recognise that you may find you've got mid-career sag. We've talked about giving mentorship to trainees, but I think there's an enormous void in career guidance for midlife consultants, many of whom start to become quite bored, quite disaffected or resentful. And instead of changing the system and ganging together and saying, well, why are we doing all this mindless clerical work that really, quite honestly, we are not justifying our salaries to the taxpayer by doing it, why don't we do something, find a different way of working, or finding some diversification so that they can find their job happier and they're not then ticking off the days on the calendar. I think that's very sad, and there are quite a few people like that.
And you, Guri, Sandhu?
Yeah, I as Janet said, when I hit 60 in about 5 years, I'll probably come back in a lesser capacity. But going back to, medical students, you offer them guidance, you talk about their careers and how, what it takes and what ENT is about and all of that. And I always say that life is more than medicine. Life is more than this. Don't let it consume you. It's about family, it's about friends, it's about experiences. Because if this is all there is, you'll come out the other end and there'll be nothing. So I get them to think about that a bit.
And Vin Paleri?
That's very true. Without the bedrock of what is home, the rest of it just won't be worth it. I enjoy work, but I do enjoy weekends and time with the family. So I think that is key. I've recognized the older I get that fitness is so key to everything I do, and my fitness regimes change, but the need to be fit is primary. Otherwise, work and everything else suffers. So that is something I've recognized. It wasn't so important in my 40s, the need to be fit. But then if fitness sags, then it does suffer. And Janet's so right about the midlife sag, in terms of losing interest in your work. It is totally true, Janet. I went through a slightly low phase, but then you have to reinvent yourself. You have to find new things to do within your job. And research is what keeps me sane. Otherwise, the clinical work, you could, by the time you're 10 years into your job, you could do this with your, I don't mean metaphorically with your eyes closed without even focusing on it. But then it's research and the competition for doing different things that keeps you going. Otherwise, for example, we just a little plug for the International Center for Recurrent Head and Neck Cancer, which we're going to open in a couple of months' time, which is, without new ventures, the midlife sag can hit you really bad.
So I'm going to pick up from what you were just talking about, new ventures and, reinventing yourself, etc. And everyone has said that, addressing the midlife sag. And do you think perhaps this is where things like mentoring the mentors, for example, or actually sponsorship and being less insular as a medical community, there are opportunities outside of medicine. You can take a sabbatical, for example, you can go into the city for a while, but also you can experience other parts of medicine. You don't have to be a practicing clinician. What's your take on this? Do you think we do enough of this? And I'll go back to Prof. Wilson.
Well, I think at the heart of this discussion, if we go to what is happening every year for every consultant and many others in the health service is an annual appraisal. And I think the annual appraisal could be a really useful rolling action self-evaluation vehicle. I mean, there's nothing intrinsically wrong with the idea of appraisal, but there are a lot of negative attitudes about it, and of course that negative attitude's a two-way street. I've been very fortunate, possibly because I was looking for something from every appraisal. I would go in and think, well, what is it I want to come out of this year from my appraisal? What do I want to be able to say to others? Well, in my appraisal, it was suggested that, and just kind of nail that. So that could be a useful starting point. So maybe we should start with making sure we have people who are really trained appraisers, and maybe we should be looking more to having one appraiser who's maybe there from another department who's trying to really give, because being an academic, I always had two appraisers in the room, and I think that makes a much healthier dynamic, because then you have a three-way conversation. So I think possibly an internal and an external appraiser looking at your untapped potential, things you haven't thought of, or empowering you to do these other things. Yes, with specific training in career development, because we've got a very, very expensive workforce in the NHS and consultants, and we are not investing in them adequately.
Yeah. And Guri, Sandhu?
Okay, I'm going to be that middle-aged person who's sagged. I don't think the NHS cares enough.
Yeah.
They don't care about our mental well-being. They don't care that we're going through a difficult period in our lives. They don't care that we have to do 4 hours of admin when we could see 20 further patients and use our skills to their best.
Yes.
And they don't really, 2 days after you retire, no one knows who you were. Mm. Think about people who've retired in your department or, no one remembers them.
Yeah.
And it's sad, but that's the way it is. And it'd be lovely to have colleagues who come to you, a cup of tea, how are you doing? Are you having a midlife sag, or are you having a midriff sag, or whatever it is? But that's not the reality of it. And as Vin said, it's your support when you leave work that is probably the most important.
Yeah.
And that's the way I see it.
So do you therefore think perhaps we have to be making plans early on in anticipation of that midlife sag?
No, or you could have other interests. Most of us, as we get older, we take up other roles, leadership of organizations, different societies and things, and research in the case of Vin.
Did you have a sabbatical? I don't think you've had one yet.
I was planning, but then COVID came along, and that was my sabbatical.
What were you going to do? Can I ask what you were going to do on your sabbatical?
I was probably going to do some gardening and taste fine food and wine, and
Very good. And COVID put a kibosh on.
Nothing definite. The reason I didn't take it is I had no definite plan.
Yes.
Because work has been everything, and outside of that, there is less. Mm-hmm. And that's why I think it's a good idea to wind down rather than to turn up one day and say I'm off.
Right.
Because it's too big a trauma, and the number of people who suffer because they suddenly retire.
So Vin, I'm not going to make it so easy for you. I'm going to say, do you think men have a harder time letting go than women?
I've had the experience of working for both men and women consultants. And if I make a mental roll call, because that's the only way I can answer this question, I think, the woman consultant at Newcastle upon Tyne hospitals who retired, let go pretty immediately, I think, and people applauded her for that. And that is something to take away. Men have had, they retired and came back and did something and so on and so forth. So there may be some truth to what you're saying. I don't think I can give you an evidence-based answer maybe, but from what I've seen in my experience, you may have a point there.
Yes, I think you're right. And for you, what do you think about people trying to do other things other than direct clinical care while they're consultants within the NHS? The reason I ask this specifically is because over the years, the NHS can be a very judgmental environment. There's some people who wanted to do other things, like maybe going to being a media presenter, for example. They get a hard time. You get people who want to go overseas and work. They get a hard time. They get criticized. Do you think there's a very detrimental NHS ideology that it's the be-all and end-all? And do you think that this contributes to our poor mental health, as Guri Sandhu said?
I think we need time for rejuvenation. We need time for regeneration. And if a person judges that time off is needed, then it should support time off. But I understand, other commitments exist, and some departments in directorate may not be able to support the person's need for sabbatical. But rejuvenation is key. And I've seen people go away, come back, be completely different. So I would support that venture. But the practicalities on the ground may be different, and this will need clearly to be discussed at a local level.
Where are you going on your sabbatical when it eventually comes around?
I'm not planning to.
You're going to work straight through retirement.
IREC is my sabbatical. And at this point in time, to be honest, I enjoy work so much. I think a sabbatical would take away the wind off my sails. So
right.
I'm going to carry on for the time being.
Right. And Prof. Wilson, what are you enjoying about retirement right now?
I'm enjoying wrestling with the German language, actually.
Oh, wow.
It's a battle I might not have started if I'd realised how big it was. But it's everyone keeps telling me it's very logical, but I think you just need to know quite a lot of it before the logic emerges. I'm sure it will.
Fantastic.
As I said, Janet, I'm enjoying the Schadenfreude.
There we go. Pun intended. Now, we are the Women in ENT Surgery UK Society. And so I'm going to ask each of you one last question. All three of you are very influential, very senior, very accomplished. You're beacons of success. And I want to ask, how do you intend to use your influence to empower women in surgery and others that feel ignored or unsupported? And I say that despite what we individually think about the prevalence of discrimination in our environment, because you cannot negate the personal stories that people have to tell. I'll start with Prof. Wilson.
Well, I'm I'm fortunate to be on the Council of the Edinburgh College of Surgeons, and it's had a very successful Let's Remove It campaign against bullying and undermining. And certainly women have been some of the victims of those bad practices. That's becoming very much part of our culture, and like every other organisation, we are striving to be even more equal and diverse and inclusive. But I think, to be fair, these things often happen one step at a time, one handshake at a time, one person helping another at a time. And I think it's very true. It's something that almost Guri was alluding to near the beginning, that you don't sort of look down on someone without giving them a hand up. And that's, I think that's where it makes a difference. As regards career guidance, I think we're continuing to try and do more to develop some strategies for that. But it's not an easy one. I don't think there's going to be a quick fix. I think it's everybody's business.
Thank you. And Guri, Sandhu?
It's a difficult one because it's not something that crosses my mind day to day with the trainees. This one's a woman, this one's a lesbian, this one's gay. They try and throw me out occasionally when a new registrar arrives. Oh, by the way, Mr. Sandhu, I'm gay, and they just throw it out at you, and you think they expect you to sort of go, oh wow, be shocked, but I'm not, because it's not something that matters to me at the end of the day. It's about the quality of the person, what they do, how well they do it, and what their skills are. And maybe I've been sheltered from the issues that women are experiencing, but as I've said, I've got some insight in that my daughter's in this as well. And other than patients saying, thank you, nurse, she's never come back and said, I feel like I'm not achieving what I could because I'm a woman. She's never said that. And I imagine it is a problem. And if I see it, I will absolutely jump on it. But I don't see it day to day. I have to accept it is an issue because the evidence is there. But maybe people around me will not express those opinions. I don't know. It's a difficult one.
I think that's a very important thing to acknowledge, that you don't see it, and there's a possibility that people around you will act differently and not behave in that way. I think that's very important because, as you say, especially the evidence is there. What's even more important is the fact that you're saying that when you see it, you will call it out there and then. And I think that's very reassuring. And over to you, Professor Paleri.
So my immediate sphere of influence, I think, will be the British Association of Laryngology. So I take over as president this weekend on Friday. And I was in preparation and thinking about this vlogcast, which is a new one on me. I was plotting and planning what I could do, because I recognized the Suraj Pay's report, I recognized the Sewell report, and other reports that attest to the fact that we have an element of discrimination and inequality going on. So if you look at the Barno program, Mimi, that's on this Friday, we have so many women surgeons, presenting very good cutting-edge research data. So that pleases me immensely. But then I know for a fact that minority ethnic and black women are less likely to pick up head and neck surgery as a specialty after finishing ENT. That seems to be the case. And I think Barno can do some measures, take some measures to set the balance right. I'm going to discuss with my committee when I take over to appoint a person with a brief of diversity and equality within Barno Council to see how we can. So that I don't think it's a token measure. I think it's a concrete measure to appoint someone with that kind of background into council to try and engender that into the DNA of Barno. And that, I think, will encourage more people to speak up. And I think that there's no safe space per se within the bound community for people to speak up. So this person could potentially be that particular person where a safe space exists for people to speak up within this entity. And, head and neck cancer is typically a disease for us among patients in the underrepresented and socioeconomically disadvantaged group, and for a fact that culturally competent and physicians from that particular background, from underrepresented societies, serve patients better, and we can recruit to trials better. So there are many advantages to be gained from inclusion, and I hope to spend the next 2 years trying to redress that balance to an extent, to the best I can.
Fantastic. Well, and on that note, I would like to thank every one of you for taking time to be with us today, for being so candid on what were some challenging discussion points. So to our audience, we've heard about rules of the game. We've heard about trying to make space for people coming in to our spaces. We talked about mentorship and sponsorship. We've talked about life outside of medicine, about the middle-aged sag that happens to consultants. And it's wonderful to be in the presence of a group of people who will continue to challenge the status quo even after retirement, hopefully continuing to inspire us. Thank you very much. And thank you for listening. Have a lovely evening. We hope you've enjoyed this episode as much as we have. Thank you once again to our guests for their time and for participating in what can be quite challenging discussions. With this episode, Wents and Friends is now officially launched. We will continue to tackle the complex issues of diversity and inclusivity throughout our series, and we hope you continue to join us. You can listen to our podcast on all major platforms such as Spotify, Apple, Amazon, etc. And do make sure you subscribe to receive alerts on our show as new episodes are released. We also invite you to leave a review, and if you have any questions or suggestions on topics you would want to hear, then please drop us a line at wents@entuk.org. Thank you for listening.